I was 43, CEO of a global fashion empire, flying toward Geneva for a board meeting that would shape the next decade of my company. My assistant, Claire, sat a few rows back, reviewing contracts. The pilot's calm voice crackled through the intercom, "Smooth skies ahead, Ms. Monroe." Smooth skies, sure, until the message came. My phone buzzed once. A simple text, no name, no number. "We will release your daughter for $750,000. You have 4 hours." At first, I thought it was a mistake. Or a sick joke. My daughter, Lily, 15, sarcastic, whip-smart, obsessed with iced coffee and indie music, was supposed to be at home in Los Angeles, safe behind the security detail my ex-husband hated but I insisted on. I typed back with shaking fingers, "What happened to my daughter?" Seconds later, another message. This time, a video. The sound hit first, muffled crying. Then her face filled the screen. My Lily. Tied to a chair, a strip of duct tape over her mouth. A man's voice said, "For hours, Ms. Monroe. Don't be late." The phone nearly slipped from my hands. Claire rushed up. "Ma'am? What's wrong?" I showed her the screen. Her face went pale. "Oh my God." "Don't," I snapped. "Don't say a word." I needed to think. Fast. The plane felt suddenly claustrophobic. The hum of the engines turned menacing. I stared at the video again, zoomed in, rewound, watched the flicker of light on her hair, the pattern of the wallpaper behind her. My brain, trained for crisis management, started analyzing details like it was a high-stakes negotiation. I knew what they wanted, money. But I also knew what they didn't realize: I was not a desperate woman. I was a dangerous one. Within minutes, I was on a secure call to my chief of security, Daniel Reyes, a former Interpol officer who owed me his career. I sent him the video and coordinates of my flight. His voice was steady. "Understood. We'll trace it." Quietly, I said. "No police until I say so." "Yes, ma'am." Then I did the one thing they never expected: I played along. I wired the $750,000. Every cent. I even recorded a voice message confirming the transfer, sounding broken, defeated, a performance worthy of an Oscar. But behind the mask, my team was tracing every transaction, every server bounce, every digital fingerprint. The hunt had already begun, and they didn't even know it. The cabin lights dimmed as we crossed the Atlantic. Outside, the clouds burned gold in the setting sun. Claire whispered, "Do you think she's alive?" I cut in. "And by the time we land, so will the people who took her." But not for long. Daniel's update came through 10 minutes later. "We've got something." The account they used, it's a proxy, but one transfer routed through a shell company in Prague. Same structure used in a trafficking ring case I worked in 2018. My blood ran cold. Prague. My ex-husband's business partner had an office there. Suddenly, this wasn't random. The next message came through while Daniel was still on the line. "Money received. Wait for instructions." I stared at it, then did something even Daniel didn't expect. I forwarded the message, the video, everything, to 3 people: the head of cybercrime at the FBI, my personal lawyer, and an intelligence contact in the State Department. Within minutes, an encrypted network went live. My private revenge had just become an international operation. 4 hours later, as the jet touched down in Geneva, my phone buzzed again. "You played well, Ms. Monroe. But now you'll pay again." Only this time, I smiled. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that the money they'd just accepted had been marked. Every digital fingerprint would lead straight back to them. And the woman they thought they'd broken was sitting 30,000 feet above their heads, turning their greed into their executioner. They sweep you through customs like you're an ordinary passenger: passport, stamp, polite smile. It should have been routine. My shoes clicked on the marble, the heel rhythm syncing with the thud in my chest. I felt the world split into two halves, the life I'd been living for decades and the next 4 hours that would decide whether Lily came back in one piece. Daniel met me on the tarmac. Up close, his jaw had eroded into a map of hard lines and older losses. "We've pushed this up the chain," he said without preamble. "FBI's on a standby call, Interpol's pulled the Prague node. We're threading the money trail now." "Good," I lied. "Make them fast." We moved like a small army, a black SUV, a local driver with a clean face, my lawyer, Claire with her battered legal pad, and a man from the State Department whose silence felt like a loaded weapon. My phone vibrated the whole drive with encrypted updates, screen names and IP digests that meant nothing to anyone but the people who made a living following digital ghosts. Inside the safe room the embassy lent me, I replayed the video again. The tape was brief, grainy, a shadowed apartment, a floral wallpaper with a tear, a lamp with a crooked shade. Tiny, innocuous things, the pattern on Lily's hoodie, the scuff on the chair leg, but together they formed a fingerprint. I zoomed until the pixels dissolved into something human, a freckle on Lily's temple, the way she blinked at the camera as if pleading to be seen. "Prague gives us a node," the Interpol rep said. "But it's a relay." The account that received the transfer was routed through 3 intermediaries. "We can follow it, but it's slow." "Slow is not an option," I snapped. "She has 4 hours. Daniel's eyes flicked to mine. He understood the arithmetic of fear. "There's another thread," he said. "Anomalies in the transfer patterns that match a laundering ring connected to a man, Marius Novak. He runs logistics for shell operations. He's been flagged before." Marius Novak. The name opened a drawer in my memory I'd kept locked. My ex-husband, Thomas, arrogant, brilliant at masking things as legal, had once partnered with a man who matched Novak's profile. We'd fought then, over ethics and contracts. I'd forced a separation that neutered him financially. I'd assumed that was the end of that story. Terror is a patient animal, it chews on old wounds. "Do we have a face?" I heard myself ask. "Surveillance picked up 2 people in the drop video," the FBI analyst said. "One's a woman with a distinctive scar along her jaw. Satellite feeds show a vehicle registered to a company linked to Novak's front operations. We can be there in 2 hours. 2 hours." The number carved itself into the floorboards of my brain. I booked a private flight east, a beat-up charter that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and expensive leather. I needed to be close enough to influence the scene, not farther away with suits and apologies. Claire protested quietly. "You want to go alone?" "No." I answered the way you answer when you've already chosen. "Bring Daniel, my lawyer, and the state rep, keep the FBI on the line. We move as one." On board, I called Thomas. He picked up on the second ring. "Ava. Geneva. Everything okay?" My voice was low and steady, the exact tone I used in boardrooms when I was about to dismantle someone's argument. "Where were you last month?" He laughed, a shallow thing that always sounded like a man trying to hide from himself. "Business, wine tasting in France." "Why?" "Who handled logistics for your Prague subsidiary last year?" Silence. "Why are you asking me this?" "Because my daughter's been taken," I said. The words landed heavy. I expected denial, outrage, cowardice. Instead, his voice narrowed. "Ava, what do you want?" "You know a Marius Novak," I said. "Tell me everything." The line cut. I could feel the pieces crowding into place, the ransom text, the Prague relay, Novak's logistics, the old business skeletons dressed in new suits. Revenge doesn't always mean flair. Sometimes it's a patient, surgical thing, tracing money through smoke and mirrors until the smoke chokes the mirror maker. We landed in Prague as the city folded into night, lights like precise circuitry. The embassy had arranged a safe house near the city center. We hit the ground running. The analysts fed us leads, a laundromat turned billing office, a shipping yard with a single container that never seemed to move, a warehouse with a rental history scrubbed by shell companies. At the warehouse, the air tasted of iron and stale coffee. Daniel and two operatives cut the lock like a thief, the kind that's practiced and cold. Inside, tacked to a corkboard, were pictures, Lily among them, time-stamped prints, a local phone number. On the back wall, someone had painted a crude map of escape routes. "He's sloppy," Daniel muttered. "Or bold. Either way, this was his mistake." A photograph on the board made my stomach drop. A grainy still of Novak, older than the files suggested, but unmistakable, standing in front of a building with a sign in check. Behind him, a car with a license plate that matched a string of payments that ended up in a Luxembourg account. I sank to my knees beside the board. The room blurred. My breath came in sharp, controlled bites. "Mom?" Claire's voice, small and raw. She hadn't been able to hide from the things we were doing. "What are you going to do?" I thumbed a photo of Lily until the edges softened. I thought of everything I'd given up to build a life that let me control chaos, ruthless deals, late nights, marriages that were transactions disguised as vows. I thought of the nights Lily fell asleep on my lap after chemo scare that never was, of the way she hummed when she painted. "You survive," I said. "Then you make them pay." We moved on a tip, a courier route Novak used to move people like freight. The operatives tracked the van to a bend outside Prague. The drivers were two men, the van held nothing but thick packs and a single crate. Cameras caught one of them tossing something into a trash bin at a truck stop, a small black bag. We recovered it. Inside, a phone with a new SIM, a receipt for a motel on the eastern edge of the city, and a torn flyer with a child's drawing taped to it. The motel's register showed a sequence of check-ins, rotations timed to avoid local patrols. But they'd made a mistake. One of the hunters, a kid in Novak's crew, had used the same credit card twice in 48 hours, once at a fuel station, once at a mechanic's. The fuel station had cameras. We fed the grainy footage to an image analyst. The kid's face unblurred like a photograph developing in reverse. His name came up, Karel Dvorak. He had a record for minor thefts, a mother in a small town an hour out of the city. We had a thread. We had a direction. The problem with revenge is you can't always predict the human variable. Novak was ruthless, but he was not a fool. He would move Lily at the first sign of pressure. The clock, merciless, kept ticking. Daniel looked at me then, and for the first time I saw something like fear. "We can make a play at the motel," he said. "We can move in, cut communications. But if they see it coming, they'll move the girl. We need to be LOW the hole wide enough they can't escape. Blow the hole wide enough." That thought settled into my bones like a plan. I made a call to the FBI liaison on my plane. "Mark every bank account Novak's ring has touched," I said. "Mark them by time and amount. Freeze the flow when I give you the word." "Ms. Monroe, freezing international accounts takes warrants." "Do it now," I said. "Use everything, state, federal, diplomatic. If you don't, I will. I will trace it myself." There was a pause. Then, "On your say." I swallowed. "Say it." "Freeze them," Mark said. On the motel's coffee-stained carpet, the team moved like a single living thing, quiet and precise. I stood at the window and watched the street. Somewhere, Lily sat in a room not much larger than an office supply closet, counting the minutes the way a child counts stars. My phone buzzed. The money we'd wired had been moved again. One of the accounts showed a withdrawal, an armored courier moving cash out of the city. We had to intercept. As we closed in, I thought of what vengeance would feel like. It would not be a spectacle. It would be as precise as a surgeon's cut, as cold as winter air. It would be public enough to mark them and private enough to keep us clean. We drove hard into the night, lights strobing the highway. Somewhere between the breath of cities and the distant glow of dawn, I realized what I had already done. I had turned their ransom into a wire that shone like a lighthouse, and I had invited the seas to swallow them. We were close. Too close to fail. And yet, As the horizon paled and the first cars began to look like beetles against the motorway, my phone lit up with a single message that made my chest hollow out. "If you cross this line, she dies." It was a challenge and a promise. My hand tightened around the wheel until the knuckles ached. I breathed in and let it out slow. "Then let's cross it," I said. "They tell you adrenaline feels like wings. They lie." Adrenaline felt to me that night like a cold wire running from my ribs to my fingertips, humming with every decision I'd ever made. We barreled toward the courier's route with headlights stabbing the dark, Daniel and two operatives in the back, Claire white-knuckled, the state rep silent as a judge. My phone hummed with the frozen account notices the FBI had finally pushed through. The money was trapped, a glass fish in a bowl. We hit the truck stop like a storm. Men in plain clothes fanned out, the local police pretended ignorance and then cooperated when the American badge whispered urgency. The armored van idled, two men sipping coffee, unaware they were the center of a dragnet. I watched them through a pane of glass and felt the distance between us, years of boardroom names, contracts signed in ink, and now a pair of men who'd turned my child into a negotiable asset. They were ordinary in a way that made them monstrous. The snatch was clean. Hands cuffed, bags opened, cash found in neatly wrapped bundles. But there was no Lily. The courier driver's eyes flicked down to a GPS ping on his dashboard and then up at me, a flash of the kind of panic only people who haven't yet been burned show. "They moved her," he said. "Different van. Different route. Novak called it. Orders came from." His voice was cut with a smell I knew, fear. The knot tightened. Novak had orchestrated a decoy. Classic misdirection, give up the bait to save the prize. We chased the ghost van across suburban arteries, through border check bypasses Novak's men knew like the lines on their palms. Each stop revealed the same cruel emptiness, cages opened, rooms cold, a child's drawing left on a table like a mocking signature. Whoever handled Novak's logistics thought of people as inventory. They were efficient, unsentimental, careful. Which is why their mistake was spectacular and human. One of Novak's hunters had called his mother from a payphone, reckless with affection. She answered. That call gave us a town, an address, and a small, shaky voice in Czech that sobbed when Claire played the recording back. We realized, horribly, that Novak had more than logistics, he had a pride, and pride loves ritual. He'd moved Lily into a place he trusted, a safe house embedded in the legal flanks of his own front company. Bold. Stupid. We surrounded the house like wolves. Daniel readied the breach team, I signed off without flinching. The door went down in a blur, flashbangs, shouted commands in two languages, boots striking drywall. For a second the world was white noise and falling plaster and then, astonishingly, silence. A child's voice answered a shouted name, a thin, scared sound that tore something raw open in me. I ran in. She was there, smaller than in my head, like a book I'd misremembered the size of. Lily's eyes met mine and for a second the rest of the room disappeared, the men, the cameras, the papers tacked to the wall. I swept her into my arms and all the horror of the last hour poured out of her in ragged breaths. She smelled like antiseptic and old blankets and exactly like the daughter I had braided hair for when she was 6. We were not safe. Novak's men were already moving, one slipped past a rear exit, another dove for a window. In the chaos, a man in a suit I recognized from old corporate events, a face I'd seen at dinners, the man who'd smiled while proposing deals that enriched Thomas's subsidiaries, locked eyes with me for a half beat. My brain tried to file him, associate, partner, traitor. Thomas. The name dropped into the room like a bomb. He stepped from the shadows as the team was sweeping the yard. Ava, he said, as if he'd been invited. Everything in me wanted to throttle him. Instead, I let Lily cling to me and watched him. His face had that same oily calm I'd once loved for its steadiness, now it read like a ledger of bad choices. You shouldn't have come, he said. You hid her in your partner's warehouse, I replied. The words were a scalpel. He smiled, small and practiced. It wasn't like that. It never was with him. with Thomas, nothing was ever only one thing. The room closed in, agents cuffing men, Claire sobbing with relief, Lily whispering my name. But under every relieved breath there was the crackle of betrayal. Novak's arrest would buy us time. It would not buy forgiveness. As officers hauled the suited man into a van, he shot me a look that meant more than any confession could. I did this for us. I felt vomit rise at the thought. For what? Money? Power? Or something worse, survival at the cost of my child's safety? Tell me everything, I said to Thomas once the initial flurry died. My voice was not a question. He looked at Lily in my arms and then at me, and for the first time in years, I saw fear that was not performative. It was supposed to be clean, he said. A transaction. Not like this. I didn't know. I don't want excuses. I pressed. Who else knows? He hesitated. Then, slowly, the names began to fall like teeth. Associates I'd trusted, board members I negotiated with, a banker who'd smiled too easily. Novak had been a node in a web that stretched into my life in ways I hadn't wanted to admit. Outside, sirens sang. Inside, Lily's breathing finally steadied. My hand shook. I had her. I had them. But the lines of complicity ran deeper than a single arrest. Thomas's whisper, the man who'd once been married to me, who'd once shared my bed and my balance sheets, told me that the simple justice of tonight was only the first page. You built an empire on rules, Thomas murmured. Some of us built on gray. Then watch me make gray an ugly color, I said. He scoffed, tired. You always went too far, Ava. Not far enough, I answered. He smiled, and the smile was a promise that the war had only just begun. If you burn something long enough, even gold turns black. By dawn, that's what I had, ashes, money trails, and the truth sitting across from me in handcuffs. Thomas Monroe, the man I once built an empire with, the father of my child, looked almost human again under fluorescent light. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt, his tie hung limp, an artifact of control that no longer fit him. Behind him, Interpol agents sifted through evidence in plastic gloves, photographing documents from Novak's safe house. I watched them work, every click of the camera another nail in a coffin I'd been building since the plane. Let's start simple, I said. You sold your daughter's safety for what? Profit margins? Debt relief? His mouth twisted, half smile, half spasm. You don't understand, Ava. They came after me first. Novak didn't want Lily. Don't you dare say her name. I slammed my palm on the metal table. You made her currency. He flinched. That tiny reaction was the first true thing about him I'd seen in years. Daniel leaned against the wall, arms folded, letting me take the lead. His eyes flicked between us like a man watching a wire about to snap. He's telling part of the truth, he said quietly. We cross-checked Novak's logs. Thomas was laundering funds for a syndicate tied to your fashion house's Asian contracts. When the FBI froze the accounts, he panicked. So he made me the leverage, I said flatly. Because no one ever believes the woman's not part of her husband's crimes. Thomas swallowed. It wasn't supposed to go that far. Novak said. Stop hiding behind his name, I cut him off. He's in custody. You're not protected anymore. He looked up, and for the first time I saw it, the smallness, the pathetic truth. I was losing everything, Ava. The houses, the cars. I needed one last deal to stay afloat. Novak offered to move $7 million for me through his channels. He took the advance, and then he asked for something else. My stomach turned. Lily. Thomas nodded, shame or cowardice, maybe both, flickering across his face. He said he needed insurance. I thought it was a bluff. I thought he'd just. You thought you could outsmart a criminal, I whispered. You thought your brilliance would keep you safe. But you gambled with her life. I stood up before I said something that couldn't be unsaid. Daniel caught my eye and nodded toward the door. Outside, the air smelled of old coffee and printer ink. The embassy was waking up, unaware it was sitting on the ruins of a man's life. Claire sat in the hallway, holding Lily. My daughter had refused to leave my side since we got her back. She was asleep now, head on Claire's lap, a blanket draped over her like fragile armor. I brushed her hair back, the gesture automatic and ancient. Daniel joined me, his voice low. Interpol's keeping Novak isolated. But the web's bigger. The accounts Novak used? They tie into shell companies registered in Zurich, New York, and the Caymans. Someone funneled money through your corporation months ago. My corporation? I turned, ice crawling up my spine. You're saying? I'm saying someone inside Monroe Group is part of this. We pulled the metadata. 2 of the authorized transfers came from a device in your LA headquarters. I let out a slow breath. Of course. The rot wasn't just external, it had spread through my own walls. Claire looked up, exhaustion painted under her eyes. Who would do that? Someone who thinks loyalty is negotiable, I said. Someone who still believes I'm too distracted to notice. I called my general counsel in LA via secure line. The man's voice trembled when he realized who was on the other end. Ms. Monroe, we heard, we're so glad your daughter. Save it, I said. Pull every transaction for the last 6 months. Any authorization outside standard payroll. I want names, timestamps, IPs. Yes, ma'am. I hung up and stared out the window. Below us, Prague shimmered under pale daylight. A city that hid criminals in penthouses and priests in basements. For the first time, I realized revenge wasn't a finish line, it was a labyrinth. Every exit revealed another door. Later that afternoon, Daniel entered the embassy office holding a single folder. You're going to want to sit for this. Inside were photographs, high-resolution captures of transfer approvals, timestamps, and a signature authorization. At the bottom, Claire Devereux. I looked up sharply. That's impossible. She's been with you for 10 years, Daniel said quietly. She had full access to your accounts. No. I shook my head. Claire was the one who. But the more I said it, the less it sounded like truth. Claire had been there from the start, the perfect assistant, loyal, tireless, always one step ahead. Too perfect. Daniel met my eyes. Ava, we checked the metadata. The transfer originated from her laptop. The encrypted tunnel routes to an offshore server in Monaco. Novak's men used that exact tunnel to move funds last year. It felt like gravity shifted. Get her in here. He hesitated. Ava. Now. When they brought her in, she looked small, tired, but not afraid. That was what chilled me. She met my gaze with an almost serene expression. You figured it out. Why? I asked. My voice was too calm. Why betray me? Because loyalty doesn't pay, Ava, she said simply. I gave you 10 years. 10 years cleaning up after your messes, watching you turn everything into a game. Novak offered me enough to never be someone's shadow again. Lily was never part of the deal, I said. Her face flickered, the faintest crack. That wasn't supposed to happen. Novak wanted leverage. He said it was only temporary. I didn't think he'd. You didn't think. My voice cut sharper than a blade. You used my daughter to make yourself rich. She exhaled, eyes wet but unflinching. You wouldn't understand. You were born with power. Some of us have to steal it. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. Get her out of my sight, I said. As the agents led her away, she turned back once. You think this is over? Novak was just a courier. There's someone above him, the one who bankrolled everything. You'll see soon enough. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the embassy's dark office with Lily asleep on the couch beside me, Daniel standing guard by the door. Every flicker of light outside felt like a heartbeat in the walls. Claire's last words wouldn't stop echoing. Someone above him. By morning, the FBI sent new intel, a final data string, decrypted overnight. The real account holder. The architect of the ransom, the laundering, the betrayal. The name on the screen made my stomach drop. Elias Marin. My mentor. The man who'd taught me everything about business, ethics, and strategy, the one who'd called me his best investment. Daniel leaned over my shoulder. You know him? Oh yes, I whispered. I owe him everything. Then I smiled, the kind of smile that means war. Which means he owes me his life. When the name Elias Marin lit up the screen, something cold and careful settled in my chest. He had been my teacher, the man who'd taught me how to read a balance sheet like a prayer, how to make negotiation feel like a favor, how to turn a fledgling line of dresses into a global brand. He'd been the one who pulled me into rooms I didn't belong in and then handed me the map out. Now his name sat between me and the thing I loved most. I left Prague with Lily tucked into the crook of my arm and a new focus: find Elias, learn why he'd turned my life to ash, and then decide how to repay him in a currency he understood. I had no illusions that this would be clean. Architects don't fall easily, they build scaffolds and booby traps, they carve escape hatches into the walls. You have to go looking for them with a demolition permit and a prayer. His public life was charitable boards and keynote addresses, his private life was rumor and shadow. He kept residences in 3 cities, but his true power lived in one place, the Marin Foundation's headquarters, a glass and steel cathedral that sat like a blade along the river in Geneva. It was the sort of building meant to feel benign, donors waved checks and left praising the good work. Money moved through it like whispered secrets. We struck while the world slept. I had the legal muscle in the US and the diplomatic muscle in Europe, but none of that would help if Elias had already prepared legal defenses, shell companies, and smiling interviewers. So I used the thing he'd taught me to use best: optics. First, a private meeting. I requested a one-on-one, a courtesy for a former mentee. He agreed. He always agreed when his ego said it would look good. We met in a skylit atrium, the kind of corporate lobby that smelled faintly of citrus and arrogance. He rose when he saw me, that practiced charm in place like a mask. Ava, he said, as if I were a museum piece he'd restored. You look tired. You taught me how to read tiredness in other people, I said. So you know I'm not here for coffee. He smiled, thinking he knew the shape of my visit. To what do I owe the pleasure? I placed a photograph on the marble table, a grainy still from Novak's safe house. His blue eyes flicked to the image, then to me. For a man who had taught me to slice through pretexts, his reaction was small and almost human. You know him, I said. Elias's voice softened, like a velvet glove. Novak was a problem I thought solved. Ava, what did you expect? The world we built is messy. Messy doesn't mean you kidnap children, I said. You used Lily to move money through channels you control. Why? He looked at me for a long time, the way a sculptor studies a block of marble for flaws. I did not think I would have to explain myself to you, he said finally. You were always so far ahead. You still are. I kept my face neutral, though my knees wanted to give. Explain. His answer was a story in small increments. He spoke of markets and movements, of geopolitical currents that washed over fashion like tides. He spoke of deals he'd brokered, of interests that had depended on the networks he built, networks that, when threatened, required cold decisions. He did not use the word test, but the rhythm of his sentences implied it. He suggested that in times of fracture, one could count how solid an ally was by watching what they would do when everything burned. When the accounts froze, he said, we needed to see who would break and who would be broken. You have enemies you don't even know about. I was trying to force clarity. You forced terror, I said. You weaponized my daughter. His face changed then, not into remorse, but into something smaller, more precise. You will understand, one day, why the world demands such clarity. I felt the old warmth of mentorship curl into bile. Who gave you the right? He shrugged. History does. The markets. Power. I was cleaning house. Your house, I corrected. He held his hands up like a man who'd been accused of something inevitable. If you want to play chess, Ava, play chess. Tonight was a move. I left without slapping him. I didn't need the satisfaction. I had lived long enough among men who equated cruelty with cleverness. The important part wasn't what Elias had said, it was the evidence he'd left behind, the threads that proved he had motive and means and a network bigger than Novak's. Back at the safe house, I watched the news cycle like a hawk. Elias smiled for the camera in an interview arranged with the foundation's PR director, calm, articulate, luminous. We stand for transparency, he said. We condemn violence. The words were poison because they were false. If Elias had wanted to keep power, he'd painted himself innocently. To topple him, I would have to take the same canvases he used, media, money, and men's illusions, and set them on fire. I had 3 vectors, legal, public, and personal. Legally, Novak's testimony and the metadata tied to Claire's laptop gave us a scaffold to demand warrants. Publicly, I could leak slices of the truth, small enough to look like rumor until the next piece fell into place. Personally, I would go after the arteries, the banks and the board members who laundered favor into profit. First came the leak. I handed a dossier, cleanly redacted, damningly suggestive, to a journalist I trusted. The story ran by morning, founder of Marin Foundation linked to international money trails. The headline slapped the foundation's donors awake. The foundation's board called emergency meetings. Elias's smile wavered on camera. He responded by unleashing lawyers and denials. He moved quickly, the architect proving he knew how to shore up a crumbling facade. But he underestimated one thing, me. You cannot run a corporation the size of mine without cultivating people who owe you favors in 10 cities. I called in those favors like a bill due and watched as banks froze accounts, ship manifests were pulled, and auditors walked into the Marin Foundation. Elias tightened his smile, then the smile cracked, and when it did, everything behind it rattled. And yet, even as the world tilted under the force of the revelations, Elias did something I hadn't expected. He smiled at me in court the way a man smiles at his own funeral, serenely, as if he were content with the spectacle. He'd prepared public defenses and private contingencies. He had lawyers who filed injunctions within hours and PR teams who rewrote facts into narratives. He'd expected a fight, and he relished it. My victory was partial and costly. The foundation's board suspended Elias pending investigation. Several of his closest advisors resigned in disgrace. Banks refused to touch shell entities linked to him. But in the days' aftermath, as I sat with Lily and watched her sketch the things that made her safe, cats, rainbows, me, a new message slid across my phone. No number I recognized. No preamble. Just 3 words. You burned my sculpture. I showed the screen to Daniel. He read it and then, very slowly, said, he thinks in metaphors. I understood then that Elias wasn't merely an architect, he was a sculptor. He had carved systems and people into shapes that suited him. When I'd smashed one, he would recast another. And the people he'd used as models, the men who'd helped him launder, the board members who'd turned a blind eye, were only the beginning. The final blow came when the FBI uncovered a ledger buried in one of Elias's offshore accounts, a list of payments and names that included not just Novak but also Marcus Hale, my longtime confidant and the chairman of my board. Marcus had been the one who'd negotiated our most delicate partnerships, the hand I shook when I needed to know a favor would be honored. His name on the ledger felt like frost across my heart. The betrayal was clean and surgical. Marcus had signed approvals that allowed certain transfers to bypass standard checks. He'd done it quietly, with the excuse that speed safeguarded the brand. That speed had cost us everything. When I called Marcus, he sounded as though he'd been sleeping. For a panicked second, he tried the old line, confusion, mistake, a nephew's name. But his voice hardened when I said, "You sold me." "I did what I had to," he said. "You don't get to judge, Ava. You're not the only one who built something." "You sold my daughter's safety," I repeated, and this time there was no question in my tone. "Why?" Silence answered. "Then, because some debts can't be paid with money. Some are paid with influence." I thought of all the times I'd trusted Marcus with the off-ramps of my company, the things you outsource when you don't want exposure. I thought of how easily influence could be layered into transactions until it looked like just business. The realization hit me like cold water. The rot had seeped into my house, and now it had the keys. I sensed the moment I'd crossed a threshold. Elias had been an architect, Claire a thief, Thomas a coward, Novak a courier. Marcus was the greased hinge that let every door swing. This was not a revenge that could be contained to one city or one arrest. It had to be an unmaking, of reputations, of companies, of the very assumptions of power under which we behaved. I put Lily to bed that night and told her a story about a woman who'd lost everything and then learned how to make the world a little less dangerous. The story was true, but it was not yet complete. Outside, in the dark, my phone buzzed again. A single image this time, a carved wooden sculpture, a small, graceful figure with a blade across its chest. Someone had left it on my doorstep. A note lay beside it. "Finish the gallery." Elias didn't just want me to fall. He wanted me to keep walking through the rooms he'd built, to pick apart the exhibits until he could no longer stand. The invitation was both a threat and a map. I placed the sculpture on the mantel and stared at it until the lines of wood became an equation: take the architect down, expose the chairman, dismantle the network. Public ruin followed by private collapse. Fire for fire. And then, as if to make the plan real, I reached for my phone and started dialing. I thought the worst was behind us. I was wrong. Geneva burned with headlines for days: the fashion queen exposes global crime ring. Investors panicked, markets trembled, and Elias Marin's empire crumbled like glass under a hammer. I should have felt victory. Instead, every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lily's face, the moment I'd found her tied to that chair, the way she flinched even when I reached to hold her. We were safe now, I told myself. But safety was an illusion. 3 weeks later, I got a message. No text, no call. Just a photo. Lily, sitting in a cafe. Alone. A man's reflection in the window behind her. The caption read, "You finished your war too soon." My heart turned to ice. Daniel was at my side in seconds, scanning the metadata. The image was taken yesterday, in Zurich. She'd been painting there, a study abroad program, she said, one I'd approved because I wanted her to live again. "We can have agents there in 2 hours," Daniel said. "No," I replied. "I'm going myself." Zurich was too clean for what waited there. I found her in a gallery downtown, surrounded by her new paintings, cold, abstract things that looked like glass bleeding color. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Mom," she said softly. "You made it." I wanted to hug her, but something in the room stopped me. The same stillness I'd felt in Novak's warehouse. A man stood in the corner, dressed in gray, silent, confident. He looked familiar, too familiar. Then it hit me. Elias Marin's eyes. Older. Tired. But still calculating. "Hello, Ava," he said. "Beautiful work, isn't it? She inherited your precision." I stepped between them. "You stay the hell away from her." He smiled faintly. "She came to me." Lily's voice cut through the air like a blade. "He told me everything. How you used people. How you burned the world to feel powerful. He said you turned me into a symbol, not a daughter." I froze. "Lily, that's not." "He showed me the files," she said. "The ones you leaked. You made sure everyone else fell, but you kept your shares hidden under new names. You wanted control, not justice." My throat closed. That's not true. But it was. Somewhere in all the chaos, I'd made sure my legacy survived. I hadn't even realized it until she said it out loud. Elias stepped closer. I didn't have to destroy you, Ava. You did it for me. The student perfected the master's lesson. I turned to Lily. Don't believe him. He's manipulating you. Maybe, she said. But you taught me how power works. I just learned faster. Before I could speak, security alarms shattered the quiet. Elias's men, or hers, I couldn't tell anymore, surrounded the room. The smell of smoke hit first, then the fire alarms. Someone had set the gallery ablaze. Daniel's voice crackled through my earpiece. Ava, get out now. The exits are blocked. I grabbed Lily's hand, but she pulled away. Go, Mom. You wanted a clean world? Burn it clean. Lily. I screamed, but she stepped backward into the smoke, her eyes calm, almost kind. Behind her, Elias disappeared into the fire. I don't remember how I got out. Just the taste of ash and the sound of sirens. The gallery collapsed minutes later. 2 days later, they found 2 bodies burned beyond recognition. One male. One female. DNA said one was Elias Marin. The other, inconclusive. They handed me Lily's necklace, melted but intact. I buried it in a quiet field outside Prague, the first place she'd ever flown a kite. For weeks, I dreamed of her, standing in the fire, paint on her hands, smiling like she finally understood something I never did. Then, last night, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, a painting. A woman looking out an airplane window, holding a phone. Below it, written in her handwriting. You were right, Mom. Revenge isn't power. It's gravity. I laughed. Then I cried until my voice broke. They never found her body. And part of me hopes they never will. Because maybe she escaped. Maybe she finished what I couldn't, breaking free of all of us, of every chain built from money, guilt, and pride. Maybe the fire didn't take her. Maybe she became it. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.